The train wheezed to a stop at Dry Willow Station like an old man settling into his deathbed. Through the grimy window, Abigail Jane Fletcher watched the rain slash sideways across the platform, turning the October afternoon into something that belonged more to nightmares than to new beginnings. She gathered her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders and reached for the worn leather satchel that held everything she owned in this world. 28 years of living, and it all fit in a bag small enough to carry with one hand. The other passengers, a handful of miners and 2 ranch hands, had already pushed their way to the exit, eager to escape the cramped car that smelled of tobacco smoke and wet wool. Abigail waited. She'd learned long ago that rushing toward disappointment didn't make it any easier to bear. The conductor, a grizzled man with kind eyes, paused beside her seat. "This your stop, miss?" "Yes." She stood, smoothing down her dark wool dress. It was her best dress, though that wasn't saying much. The hem showed signs of careful mending, and the sleeves had been let down twice to accommodate her height. But it was clean and pressed, and she'd sewn a fresh white collar onto it just yesterday. "Got folks meeting you?" The conductor's voice held the careful neutrality of someone who'd seen too many young women step off trains into trouble. "I have employment arranged." She lifted her chin slightly. "Mr. Josiah Whitmore at the general store." The conductor's weathered face shifted. Just a fraction. Something flickered in his eyes, pity, maybe, or knowledge he didn't want to share. "Well then, mind the step down. Miss gets mighty slick in this weather." The cold hit her the moment she stepped onto the platform. Not just cold, wet cold. The kind that seized your bones and shook them like a terrier with a rat. Her old oilcloth coat, purchased second-hand in St. Louis, proved about as useful as tissue paper against the driving rain. Dry Willow Station consisted of little more than a covered platform and a small ticket office with windows that rattled in their frames. Beyond that, the town stretched out in a gray smear of clapboard buildings and muddy streets. Somewhere among those rain-blurred structures was Whitmore's general store, and with it, her future. Abigail had answered Mr. Whitmore's advertisement in the Missouri Gazette with careful penmanship and impeccable figures. Seeking educated person of good character for bookkeeping position. Must have experience with accounts and inventory. Room and board included. Dry Willow offers opportunity for those willing to work. His response had arrived within the month, praising her qualifications and extending a formal offer of employment. She'd sold her few pieces of furniture, paid her final week's rent on the cramped room above the bakery, and bought a one-way ticket west. Now, standing in the rain with her satchel growing heavier by the second, she wondered if she should have asked more questions. The ticket office door banged open, and a thin man in spectacles peered out. "You planning on standing there till you drown, miss?" "I'm looking for Whitmore's general store. Down Main Street, turn left at the church. Can't miss it, biggest building on the block." He started to close the door, then paused. "You're the bookkeeper from Missouri?" "Yes." This time, she was certain of the look that crossed his face. Definitely pity. "Well, good luck to you." The door slammed shut before she could ask what he meant. Main Street was a river of mud that sucked at her boots with every step. The few people she passed, men mostly, hunched against the rain, barely glanced her way. A woman swept by in a buggy, her face hidden beneath a black umbrella, the wheels throwing up fans of muddy water that spattered Abigail's skirt. She found the church easily enough, a modest white building with a steeple that pointed accusingly at the gray sky. Turning left, she saw the sign, Whitmore's General Store and Sundries, painted in fading gold letters on a green background. The store occupied a 2-story building with large windows displaying bolts of fabric, tin goods, and farm implements. A Help Wanted sign sat crooked in one window. Abigail paused to straighten her collar, tuck a strand of wet hair behind her ear, and paste on her most professional smile. The bell above the door announced her arrival with a cheerful jingle that seemed to mock the knot in her stomach. The store's interior was everything she'd hoped for. Well-organized shelves stretching to the ceiling, Barrels of flour and sugar, the rich smell of coffee beans and leather. Behind the counter stood a portly man with magnificent gray whiskers, measuring out penny candy for a small boy. Mr. Whitmore. He looked up, and his face went through a series of expressions so quickly she could barely catalog them all. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been alarm, and finally, settling on a fixed smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, may I help you, Miss—" "I'm Abigail Fletcher. From Missouri, you hired me for the bookkeeping position." The penny candy scattered across the counter as his hand jerked. The little boy grabbed 2 pieces and ran out before anyone could stop him. "Miss Fletcher." He said her name like it tasted bad. "I see. I apologize for arriving in such weather. If you could direct me to my lodgings, I'd be happy to change into dry clothes and begin work immediately." Mr. Whitmore came around the counter slowly, as if approaching a skittish horse. He was shorter than she'd expected, barely reaching her shoulder. "Miss Fletcher, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." The knot in her stomach tightened. A misunderstanding. "When I placed that advertisement, I naturally assumed. That is, your letter was so well written, and you signed with just your initials." He cleared his throat. "I was expecting a man. My letter clearly stated my name, Abigail J. Fletcher." "Yes, well, I thought perhaps Abraham or Albert." He waved a pudgy hand. "The point is, this position isn't suitable for a woman. The work involves lifting heavy ledgers, staying late to balance accounts, dealing with rough men who come in for supplies. It wouldn't be proper." "Mr. Whitmore, I've been keeping books for Hartman's Bank in Kansas City for 3 years. I've dealt with ledgers heavier than flour sacks and men rougher than any farmer buying seed. Be that as it may, you offered me this position in writing." She pulled his letter from her satchel, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "I've traveled 800 miles on the strength of your word." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'll reimburse your train fare. Of course, it's the only decent thing to do." "I don't want your money. I want the job you promised me." "I'm sorry, Miss Fletcher, but my mind is made up. This is a respectable establishment, and I have to think of my customers' sensibilities. A woman handling their accounts, knowing their business. It wouldn't be right." She stood there, rainwater pooling around her boots, and felt something inside her chest crack like ice on a pond. Not break, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of breaking, but crack. "I see." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her satchel. "And the lodgings you mentioned in your letter?" He had the decency to flush. That was the room above the store. Obviously, that wouldn't be appropriate now. "Obviously." "Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house on Elm Street. Very respectable. She might have a room." Abigail knew without asking that Mrs. Patterson's respectable boarding house would be full, or too expensive, or would have some other convenient reason to turn away a woman with no position and no connections. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitmore." She managed to keep her voice level, even pleasant. 28 years of practice. After all, "I won't trouble you further." She turned toward the door, her wet skirts heavy as chainmail. "Miss Fletcher." His voice stopped her. "The train. The next one back east doesn't come through for 3 days. Then I suppose I have 3 days to enjoy your town's hospitality." The bell jangled again as she left, this time sounding like mocking laughter. Outside, the rain had intensified. The street was nearly deserted now, everyone with sense having found shelter. Abigail stood under the store's narrow awning and tried to think. She had $43 to her name. The train ticket had cost $12, leaving her with enough for perhaps 2 weeks in a boarding house. If she was careful, if she bought a ticket back east, she'd arrive with barely enough for a week's lodging while she looked for work. If anyone would hire her, the reason she'd left Missouri in the first place pressed against her thoughts like a bruise. Too outspoken. Mister, Hartman had said. Too rigid in your thinking. The men don't like taking orders from a woman, Miss Fletcher, and you don't seem to understand when to soften your approach. Thunder rolled across the sky like a barrel downstairs. The rain came harder, bouncing off the muddy street in little explosions. She couldn't go back, not to Missouri, not to any place where her reputation as a difficult woman had already spread through the careful whispers of bankers and businessmen. She'd gambled everything on this new start, and now she was standing in the rain in a town that didn't want her, with nowhere to go and night coming on fast. The rain fell harder now, turning the October afternoon into premature twilight. Abigail pressed herself against the storefront, but the narrow awning offered little protection. Water streamed from the edges like a curtain, splashing mud onto her already ruined boots. She needed to move. Standing here like some tragic figure from a penny dreadful wouldn't solve anything. Down the street, she spotted a faded sign, Murphy's Coffee House. The windows glowed yellow with lamplight, promising warmth and shelter, at least for the price of a cup of coffee. The wind tried to tear the door from her hand as she entered. She managed to close it without slamming, though water pooled immediately around her feet. The coffee house was small, 6 tables covered in red checkered cloth, a long counter with mismatched stools, and a pot-bellied stove radiating blessed heat. Only 3 customers occupied the space. 2 old men played checkers near the stove, their game apparently more important than the stranger dripping water on the floor. The third sat alone at a corner table, his back to the wall. Abigail noticed him the way she noticed everything cataloging details automatically. Tall, even sitting down. Dark hair that needed cutting. Work clothes that had seen better days but were clean. A leather coat hung on the chair beside him, still beaded with rain. He glanced up from his coffee, met her eyes for perhaps 2 seconds, then returned his attention to the newspaper spread before him. Well now, look what the storm blew in. The woman behind the counter was built like a pickle barrel, with graying hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun. You look half drowned. Honey, come sit by the stove. Thank you, but Abigail hesitated. Every penny mattered now. How much for coffee? 3 cents. 5 if you want it with cream and sugar. She could afford 3 cents. She could afford to sit somewhere warm and dry while she figured out what to do next. Just black, please. The woman, Murphy, presumably poured from a blue enamel pot that had seen better decades. You're the bookkeeper from back east. Word travels fast in a town this size. Former bookkeeper, apparently. Abigail wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. Mr. Whitmore changed his mind. That man's a fool and a coward. Murphy set the pot back on the stove with unnecessary force. Advertises for help, gets exactly what he asked for, then runs scared because you're wearing skirts instead of trousers. One of the checker players cackled. Josiah Whitmore ain't been nothing but scared since the day he was born. Scared of his customers, scared of his wife, scared of his own shadow. Now, Eugene, that's not Christian talk, Murphy chided, but her heart wasn't in it. Abigail sipped her coffee. It was strong enough to float horseshoes, bitter as her current circumstances, and absolutely perfect. Might you know of any other employment opportunities in town, or reasonable lodgings? Murphy's face softened with something that might have been sympathy. Honey, I'd hire you myself if I could afford it. As for lodgings, she shook her head. Mrs. Patterson's is full up with railroad workers. The hotel charges $2 a night robbery. If you ask me, there's Widow Chen's place, but she only takes long-term boarders. $2 a night, at that rate. Abigail's money would last less than 3 weeks. And that was without eating. Thank you for the information. She took another sip of coffee, trying to make it last. The door burst open, admitting a gust of wind, rain, and a boy of perhaps 12. He shook himself like a wet dog, spattering water in all directions. Ma storm's getting worse. Pa says to close up early and get home before the creek rises. Tell your PA I'll close when I'm good and ready, Murphy replied, but she was already untying her apron. Though I suppose he's got a point. This rain keeps up. Miller's Creek will jump its banks for sure. She turned to Abigail. You got somewhere to go, honey? I'll figure something out. Murphy's lips pressed together. She glanced at the corner table, where the tall man continued reading as if the conversation didn't concern him. Luke! He looked up. Abigail noticed his eyes were gray, like the storm outside. This young lady needs help. I don't need, Abigail started, but Murphy talked right over her. She surely does. Got stranded here by Josiah Whitmore's cowardice, and now she's got no place to stay with this storm coming in. Luke Hart. She remembered seeing his name on a delivery receipt at Whitmore's, folded his newspaper with deliberate precision. When he spoke, his voice was low, careful. Not my business. Luke Hart, your mother would turn in her grave. My mother's been gone 10 years, Mrs. Murphy. He stood, reaching for his coat. She's past caring what I do or don't do. He was even taller than Abigail had guessed. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes when he passed her table. He paused, just for a moment. Train stations got benches. Station master usually leaves the waiting room unlocked. Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Murphy sighed. That man, been sour as week-old milk since, well, never mind. The station's better than nothing, I suppose, though those benches are harder than a preacher's heart. The old men abandoned their checker game, grumbling about wet weather and creaking joints. Within minutes, Abigail found herself alone again as Murphy hustled her son out into the storm. She sat in the empty coffee house, listening to the rain hammer the roof. 3 cents spent on coffee, $42.97 remaining. The train station waiting room would be cold, public, and uncomfortable, but it would keep her dry. Tomorrow she could try again other businesses, other possibilities. Or she could spend $12 on shame and retreat. Outside, something crashed a loose shutter or a fence board giving way to the wind. Abigail finished her coffee, left the mug on the counter, and stepped back into the storm. The train station lurked at the far end of town, a 10-minute walk in good weather. Tonight, with the wind trying to peel her off the boardwalk and the rain coming sideways, it took twice that long. By the time she reached it, she couldn't feel her fingers. The waiting room was everything she'd feared, a bare rectangle with hard wooden benches, yellowed wanted posters on the walls, and a cold that seemed to have taken up permanent residence. But it was dry, and that counted for something. She tried to arrange herself on one of the benches, using her satchel as a pillow. Her wet clothes clung unpleasantly, and she knew she'd be courting lung fever if she didn't get warm and dry soon, but there was no help for it. Thunder shook the building. Through the single window, she could see Miller's Creek, swollen and angry, churning past its usual banks. If it rose much higher, it would cut the town in half. The door opened. Luke Hart stood in the entrance, water streaming from his hat. He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. Wind's getting worse. This old building won't stand up to it if it really starts to blow. He gestured with one hand. Got a barn about a quarter-mile out. It's not fancy, but it's solid. You're welcome to wait out the storm there. Pride warred with practicality. Pride whispered that she didn't need charity from taciturn strangers. Practicality pointed out that she was wet, cold, and sitting in a building that creaked ominously with every gust. I don't want to impose. You're not, he cut her off. I'm offering because it's the decent thing to do. Take it or leave it. Another crash outside, closer this time. The window rattled in its frame. All right, she stood, gathering her dignity along with her satchel. Thank you. He turned without another word and headed back into the storm. Abigail followed, staying close enough to see his broad back through the rain. They left the main road almost immediately, following what might have been a path in better weather. Now it was just another stream of mud. The barn materialized out of the darkness like a ship from fog, a solid structure of weathered wood and good craftsmanship. Luke hauled open the heavy door, and they stumbled inside. It smelled of hay and horses, leather and grain. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse nickered softly. Luke moved with the confidence of familiarity, and soon a lantern bloomed to life. "Tack room's through there," he said, pointing. "Got a stove and some dry blankets. I'll see to my horse." The tack room was small but organized, with bridles and harnesses hung neatly on pegs. An old army cot sat against one wall, and, true to his word, a small stove squatted in the corner. Abigail found matches and kindling, and soon had a fire going. She stood as close to the heat as she dared, steam rising from her soaked clothes. Through the thin walls, she could hear Luke talking to his horse, his voice gentler than she'd yet heard it. When he finally joined her, he brought a tin pot and 2 cups. "Coffee's not as good as Murphy's, but it's hot." They didn't speak while he prepared the coffee, an odd dance of 2 strangers trying not to take up too much space in a small room. When he handed her a cup, their fingers brushed briefly. His were calloused, warm despite the cold night. "Thank you," she said, "for the shelter and the coffee." He shrugged, settling onto a 3-legged stool near the door, as far from her as the small space allowed. "Storm like this kills people. Wouldn't be right, letting you freeze in that drafty station. Still, not everyone would have come back." "I'm not everyone." The wind howled around the barn's corners, but inside felt safe, solid. Abigail let the warmth of the stove work its way into her bones, trying not to think about tomorrow, about the decisions waiting for her when the storm passed. For now, she was warm and dry, drinking bad coffee in a barn with a man who'd shown her more genuine kindness than she'd received in months. It was enough. It had to be. The morning light filtered through cracks in the barn walls, painting thin lines of gold across the dusty air. Abigail woke stiff from sleeping in the hard wooden chair she'd pulled close to the dying stove. Her clothes had dried overnight, leaving them wrinkled and salt-stained from yesterday's rain. Luke was already gone. The army cot where he'd slept showed only a neatly folded blanket. Through the small window, she could see him outside, splitting wood with economical swings of an axe. Each strike rang clear in the crisp morning air. She folded the blanket he'd given her and tried to smooth her hair into something resembling respectability. Her reflection in a piece of polished tin hanging on the wall showed the truth. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd spent the night in a barn. The door opened, bringing Luke and the scent of fresh-cut pine. He set down an armload of split wood and brushed sawdust from his hands. "Coffee's on the stove in the house," he said without preamble. "Privy's out back if you need it." The house surprised her. She'd expected a rough bachelor's quarters, but the small cabin was clean and orderly. Books lined one wall, proper books, not just almanacs and cattle guides. The coffee pot sat on a well-maintained stove next to a skillet and 2 plates. "I can make breakfast," she offered. "It's the least I can do." "Already ate." He poured coffee into 2 cups, handed her one. "Got to head into town soon. Miller's Creek flooded last night. They'll need help clearing the road." "Of course, I'll just—" She paused, realizing she had nowhere to go. "Thank you again for the shelter." He studied her over the rim of his cup. In daylight, she could see lines around his eyes, a small scar on his left cheek. A man who'd lived, not just existed. "What'll you do now?" "I haven't decided." She kept her voice steady, as if she had multiple options instead of none. "Perhaps there's work in one of the neighboring towns." "Perhaps." He set down his cup. "Or perhaps you could stop pretending everything's fine when it's not." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "You've got no job, no place to stay, and probably not enough money to get far. That about right?" The directness should have offended her. Instead, she found it oddly refreshing after years of polite lies and subtle dismissals. "Close enough." Though not my business. Mrs. Chen might have work. She takes in laundry for the railroad crews. It's hard work, but it's honest. Laundry. The word tasted bitter. From bookkeeping for a bank to washing other people's undergarments. How far she'd fallen. Pride makes a cold bedfellow, Luke said quietly. Trust me on that. Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. This man with his books and his careful distance, living alone at the edge of town. What had pride cost him? I'll consider it, she said. He nodded and moved toward the door, then paused. The offer stands. By the way, the barn. Until you figure things out, I won't have your freezing to death on my conscience. Before she could respond, he was gone, striding toward town with the purposeful gait of a man who knew his place in the world. Abigail envied him that certainty. She washed the cups, banked the stove, and made her way back to town. The storm had left its mark everywhere, broken branches, flooding along Main Street, a torn awning flapping like a surrender flag. Men worked in groups, clearing debris and shoring up damaged buildings. She found Mrs. Chen's establishment 3 blocks off Main Street, a narrow building with steam rising from its windows. The smell of lye soap and hot water hit her before she even opened the door. Inside, 3 Chinese women worked over wooden tubs, while a 4th fed sheets through a mangle. They glanced up at Abigail's entrance, but didn't stop working. Mrs. Chen. An older woman emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on a stained apron. Her face was lined but alert, her dark eyes taking in Abigail's appearance in one swift assessment. You are the woman from the train, the bookkeeper. News really did travel fast in Dry Willow. Former bookkeeper, I'm looking for work. Can you work hard, long hours, hot water, heavy lifting? I can work. Mrs. Chen named a wage that was less than half what she'd made at the bank. Room and board included. You sleep upstairs with the other girls. No men visitors. No drinking. No trouble. I accept. If Mrs. Chen was surprised by the quick agreement, she didn't show it. You start now. Mei Lin will show you what to do. The youngest of the women, perhaps 17, beckoned Abigail over. You wash. I'll show you how. Not like washing at home. Has to be done right. The work was exactly as hard as promised. By noon, Abigail's hands were raw from the hot water and harsh soap. Her back ached from bending over the tubs. Sweat plastered her hair to her neck despite the October chill. But there was something oddly satisfying about it, too. The transformation of dirty cloth to clean. The rhythm of wash, rinse, wring. The quiet chatter of the other women in a language she didn't understand, but found soothing. You're doing good, Mei Lin said during a brief break. Some ladies, they come here thinking it's easy work. They don't last a day. I need the job. We all need the job. Mei Lin's smile was wise beyond her years. But needing and doing, not the same thing. The afternoon brought a new challenge, pickup and delivery. Mrs. Chen handed Abigail a list of addresses and a wheeled cart loaded with clean laundry. You know town now, she said. It wasn't a question. Deliver these, collect payment, bring back dirty clothes. The first few stops went smoothly. Railroad workers grateful for clean clothes, payment in coins carefully counted out. But the 4th address made her pause. Whitmore's General Store. She could skip it, claim she couldn't find it, but that would be cowardice, and she'd had enough of that. She knocked firmly on the back door. Josiah Whitmore himself answered, his face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and finally settling on discomfort. Miss Fletcher. Mr. Whitmore, your laundry. She kept her voice professionally neutral, as if delivering his washing was exactly what she'd planned when she'd stepped off that train. He took the bundle, fumbled in his pocket for payment. I hope you found suitable employment. I have, thank you. Good, good. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting the interaction to end. I'll have the next batch ready Tuesday. I'll make a note of it. She left him standing in his doorway and felt a small, petty satisfaction at his discomfort. It wasn't much, but it was something. The late afternoon sun slanted low as she finished her rounds. Her feet hurt, her shoulders ached from pulling the cart, but she'd completed the task. More importantly, she'd proven to Mrs. Chen, to the town, to herself, that she could do this work. Back at the laundry, Mrs. Chen counted the money carefully, nodded approval, and showed Abigail to the upstairs quarters. The room was small but clean, with 4 narrow beds and hooks for clothing. A window overlooked the alley, and someone had placed a pot of chrysanthemums on the sill. You wash up, then come down for dinner, Mrs. Chen instructed. We eat at 6. Alone for the first time all day. Abigail sat on the bed that would be hers and allowed herself 5 minutes of grief. For her old life, her ambitions, the woman she'd thought she'd become. Then she washed her face, changed into her other dress, and went downstairs. Dinner was rice and vegetables with bits of pork, flavored with things she couldn't identify but found delicious. The other women included her in their conversation, mixing English and Chinese, teaching her words xiaoqi for laundry, shui for water, gongzuo for work. That night, lying in the narrow bed listening to the soft breathing of her roommates, Abigail thought about Luke Hart's barn, about pride and cold bedfellows, about the strange turns a life could take. She'd fallen far from her dreams of ledgers and respectability. But she hadn't broken. That had to count for something. Outside, a dog barked. Someone laughed in the street below. The sounds of a town settling into sleep, a town that had made room for her, however reluctantly. Tomorrow would bring more hot water, more aching muscles, more small humiliations. But tomorrow she'd wake with a roof over her head, honest work to do, and the knowledge that she could survive whatever came next. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was a life. And for now, that was enough. 3 weeks had passed since Abigail first plunged her hands into the scalding wash water at Mrs. Chen's. Her palms had toughened. Her back had adjusted to the constant bending, and she'd learned enough Chinese words to follow most conversations in the laundry. The work was hard, but there was a rhythm to it, a predictability she found comforting after the chaos of her arrival. November had arrived with teeth, bringing frost that turned the puddles to glass each morning and made the wet laundry freeze on the lines. Today promised to be the coldest, yet the kind of day that made your breath visible and turned your fingers clumsy. Storm coming, Mrs. Chen announced at breakfast, studying the sky through the kitchen window. Big one, maybe snow, maybe worse. Finished deliveries early today. Abigail loaded the cart quickly, organizing the bundles by route to minimize her time in the cold. She'd learned the town's geography through these delivery runs, which shortcuts saved time, which customers tipped, which dogs to avoid. She was returning from her last delivery when she saw him. Luke Hart stood outside the freight office, signing papers while men loaded crates onto his wagon. She'd seen him perhaps half a dozen times since that night in his barn, always at a distance. He'd nod, she'd nod back, and they'd continue on their separate ways. But today he looked up as she passed, and something in his expression made her slow the cart. Miss Fletcher. Mr. Hart. He glanced at the darkening sky, then at her thin coat. You shouldn't be out much longer. This storm's going to be bad. I'm headed back now. Chen's is clear across town. He seemed to be weighing something, then gestured to his wagon. I'm going that direction. You and your cart can ride. Pride flared automatically. I can manage. I know you can. His voice was patient, as if he'd expected the protest. Question is whether you should have to. A gust of wind cut through her coat like paper, making the decision for her. Thank you. He lifted the laundry cart into the wagon bed as if it weighed nothing, then offered her a hand up to the bench. His grip was firm. warm even through her worn gloves. They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the restless shifting of the horses. The town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the storm. "You're settling in," he said finally. "Not a question."
"Well enough. The work is honest, and Mrs. Chen is fair."
"But—" She glanced at him, surprised by the perception. "No but. I'm grateful for the position." "You're grateful," he repeated. "But it's not what you wanted." "What I wanted stopped mattering the moment, mister. Whitmore decided a woman couldn't be trusted with his books." She heard the bitterness in her voice and tried to soften it. "I've learned to adjust my expectations." "Have you—" They were passing the church now, its white steeple stark against the threatening sky. Luke guided the horses with easy competence, his profile unreadable. "You never asked," she said suddenly. "That night, you never asked why I was really here, what happened in Missouri." "Figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me." "Most people can't resist prying into others' misfortunes." "I'm not most people." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "You might have noticed." Despite herself, she smiled back. "I had, actually—" They reached Mrs. Chen's just as the first snowflakes began to fall fat, lazy flakes that promised worse to come. Luke helped her unload the cart, then stood awkwardly by his wagon as if wanting to say something more. "You ever—" He stopped, started again. "You ever want to borrow a book? I've got plenty. Gets long, winter evenings." The offer surprised her. In 3 weeks, it was the most personal thing he'd said. "I'd like that, thank you." He touched his hat brim and climbed back onto the wagon. She watched him drive away, snow beginning to dust his shoulders, and wondered at the strange flutter in her chest. Inside, the laundry was in controlled chaos. Mrs. Chen barked orders in a mixture of English and Chinese while the women rushed to bring in the remaining washing before the storm hit. "Good, you're back," Mrs. Chen said. "Help Maylin with the sheets. Everything must be inside before—" A tremendous crack of thunder cut her off, followed immediately by a howling wind that rattled the windows. The lazy snowflakes became a horizontal wall of white. "Too late," Mrs. Chen muttered. "Leave it. We'll lose more than sheets if anyone goes out in that." They worked together to secure the windows and doors while the storm raged outside. Within an hour, snow had drifted halfway up the windows, turning the late afternoon into artificial night. "We sleep down here tonight," Mrs. Chen decided. "Safer, more warm." They dragged mattresses down from upstairs and arranged them near the stove. Someone produced a deck of cards, and Maylin taught Abigail a game that involved much laughing and good-natured arguing over the rules. But Abigail found her thoughts drifting to a small cabin at the edge of town, wondering if Luke was sitting alone with his books while the storm howled around his walls. She thought about that night in his barn, the careful distance he'd maintained, the unexpected kindness of a man who claimed not to care. The storm raged for 2 days. They made do with what food they had, melted snow for water when the pump froze, and kept the stove burning constantly. On the 3rd morning, Abigail woke to silence and brilliant sunshine reflecting off a world transformed by snow. 3 feet, maybe more, Mrs. Chen assessed, peering out the door. "No work today? No one can move in this." But by noon, paths began appearing as men with shovels worked to connect the town again. Abigail was helping prepare lunch when someone knocked at the back door. Luke Hart stood there, snow to his knees, a rope tied around his waist leading back to a horse. No. As her eyes adjusted to the glare, she saw he'd fashioned a kind of sled. "Checking on folks," he said simply. "You all make it through all right?"
"We're fine," Mrs. Chen answered.
"You—" "Fine." But Abigail noticed the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he favored his left shoulder. "Brought some supplies. Figured you might be running low." The sled held sacks of flour, coffee, dried beans, even some precious eggs packed in straw. Mrs. Chen's usual stern expression softened. How much do we owe you? Nothing. Neighbors help neighbors. He was already turning to go when Abigail found her voice. Wait, your shoulder you're hurt. It's nothing. Horse spooked when the barn roof partially gave. Just twisted it wrong. Come inside. Mrs. Chen commanded. Mei Lin knows herbs. She'll make a poultice. I don't need... Inside, Mrs. Chen's tone brooked no argument. You don't help anyone if you're too hurt to work. He submitted to Mei Lin's ministrations with the stoic patience of a man unused to being fussed over. Abigail brought him coffee and found herself studying his hands wrapped around the cup, scarred. Capable hands that had brought aid without thought of payment. Thank you, she said quietly. For checking on us, for the supplies. He met her eyes. You're welcome. Something passed between them in that look, something that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks warm. Then Mei Lin was back with the poultice, and the moment broke. But when he left an hour later, shoulder-wrapped and smelling of mysterious herbs, he paused at the door. About those books, offer stands, when you're ready. I'm ready, she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her reply. When the paths are clear, I'll come by. The smile he gave her was small but real, transforming his weathered face. Then he was gone, trudging back through the snow with his makeshift sled, checking on the next neighbor who might need help. Good man, Mrs. Chen observed, watching from the window. Lonely man, but good. Abigail nodded, still feeling the warmth of that smile. Outside, the snow-covered world sparkled with painful brightness, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure, much like the feelings stirring in her chest, feelings she wasn't ready to name. Not yet. But for the first time since stepping off that train, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow. The paths were clear enough by Sunday afternoon for Abigail to make good on her promise. She'd changed into her better dress, still plain, but clean and carefully mended, and wrapped her shawl tight against the cold. The walk to Luke's cabin took longer than usual, snow making each step deliberate. She found him behind the house, repairing the barn roof that had partially collapsed during the storm. He worked steadily despite his injured shoulder, fitting new boards with practiced ease. An old yellow dog lay nearby, watching with patient eyes. You shouldn't be doing that work with your shoulder still healing, she called out. He turned, and she caught what might have been pleasure flickering across his face before his usual reserved expression settled back into place. Roof won't fix itself. Animals need shelter. At least let me help hold the boards while you nail them. You ever done roof work? No, but I've learned plenty of new things lately. He climbed down the ladder, studying her for a moment. All right, but you do exactly as I say. Roof work's dangerous even without ice. They worked together through the afternoon, Abigail holding boards steady while Luke hammered them into place. He was a patient teacher, explaining each step without condescension. The dog Moses, Luke told her, supervised from his sunny spot. You weren't always a freight hauler, Abigail observed during a break. The careful way he measured and cut, the quality of his repairs, spoke of deeper skills. No, he took a long drink from his water jug. Used to do Finnish carpentry, building houses, furniture, good money in it, back in Kansas. What happened? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Life happened, things change. She recognized the tone, the same one she used when people asked about Missouri. Some stories were too heavy for casual conversation. Well, she said lightly, Dry Willow's loss is my gain. I'd never have learned roofing from a freight hauler who couldn't tell a hammer from a hay fork. That earned her an almost smile. True enough, though you're a better assistant than most I've worked with. You actually listen. Novel concept for a woman, I'm told. This time the smile was real. Whoever told you that was a fool. They finished as the sun touched the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Luke climbed down and surveyed their work with satisfaction. "That'll hold through winter now. Thank you. Thank you for teaching me." She brushed sawdust from her skirt. "About those books." "Come inside. Coffee's probably cold, but it's better than nothing." His cabin felt different with her in it. Smaller somehow. More intimate. She gravitated toward the bookshelf while he busied himself with the stove. "Shakespeare," she said, surprised. "Plutarch. Milton. I didn't expect—" "What, that an uneducated freight hauler would read?" "No." She turned to face him. "I didn't expect to find someone else who understood that books could be necessary, like air." He handed her a cup of warmed coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "My mother taught school before she married. She made sure I knew my letters, even when my father thought it was foolishness. Said a man without books was only half alive." "She sounds wise." "She was." He moved to the shelf, running his fingers along the spines with obvious affection. "Take whatever you'd like. They're meant to be read, not just displayed." Abigail selected a volume of Wordsworth, worn soft with handling. As she opened it, a photograph fluttered to the floor, a younger Luke standing beside a pretty woman in a wedding dress. She bent to retrieve it, but he was faster. The photo disappeared into his pocket, but not before she'd seen the pain flash across his face. "I should go," she said quietly. "It's getting dark." "I'll walk you back." "That's not necessary." "Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway." They walked in companionable silence through the blue-white dusk. The town seemed hushed under its blanket of snow, lamplight spilling golden from windows like promises of warmth. Moses padded along beside them, occasionally investigating interesting smells. "I'm sorry," Abigail said as they neared Mrs. Chen's. "About the photograph. I didn't mean to pry." "You didn't. It fell." He was quiet for a moment. "Her name was Catherine. Fever took her 6 years ago, back in Kansas. After that, nothing much seemed to matter. Came here for a new start." "Did you find it the new start?" He looked at her then, something shifting in his gray eyes. "Starting to think maybe I have—" The words hung between them, weightier than the simple statement warranted. Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. They'd reached Mrs. Chen's gate. Through the windows, she could see the other women preparing dinner, their movements familiar and comforting. Her new life, modest as it was. "Keep the book as long as you like," Luke said. "When you're ready for another, you know where to find me." "Luke," she hesitated, then forged ahead. "Would you like to come to church next Sunday? I mean, if you don't already attend. I've been going to the Methodist service, and Reverend Pike gives a good sermon, and—" She was rambling. She forced herself to stop. "I haven't been to church since Catherine," he said slowly. "Haven't seen much point in talking to a God who takes the good ones and leaves the rest of us to stumble along. Maybe that's exactly when we need to talk to him most." He studied her face in the lamplight. "Maybe so. I'll think on it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. She'd take it. "Good night, Luke. Thank you for the book. And the walk." "Good night, Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his rough voice did something strange to her insides. She watched him walk away, Moses trotting faithfully beside him, until the darkness swallowed them both. Then she went inside to warmth and supper and gentle teasing from Mei Lin about her book-borrowing expedition. That night, she read Wordsworth by candlelight while her roommate slept, but her mind kept drifting to gray eyes and careful hands, to the way her name had sounded on his lips, to the photograph of a younger man who'd once believed in happiness. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft as whispered secrets. Abigail pulled her blanket higher and turned another page, but the words blurred before her eyes. She was thinking of tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead in this strange new life she was building. For the first time in months, those days didn't seem quite so daunting, not with books to read and roofs to mend and a lonely man who might, just might, be ready to stop stumbling along alone. She closed the book carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. Tomorrow she'd wash clothes and deliver bundles and earn her honest wage. But tonight, she allowed herself to dream just a little of gray eyes and gentle hands, and the possibility that broken things could sometimes be mended. The snow continued to fall, covering the harsh edges of the world in soft white forgiveness. And in a narrow bed above a Chinese laundry, a woman who'd lost everything she'd thought she wanted discovered that sometimes what you needed found you when you weren't even looking. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing the kind of cold that made the old-timers mutter about signs and portents. Ice storms had made the roads treacherous for 2 weeks straight, and tonight promised to be the worst yet. The wind howled like something alive and angry, rattling the windows of the laundry with violent gusts. "No one goes out tonight, Mrs." Chen declared as darkness fell. Not for any reason. But Abigail couldn't stop checking the window, watching the street for a familiar tall figure. Luke had promised to bring more firewood today. Their supply was running dangerously low, and with this storm, they'd need every stick to keep warm. "He's not foolish enough to come in this weather," Mei Lin said gently, noticing her vigil. "He'll wait until it passes." Abigail nodded, but worry gnawed at her. She'd grown accustomed to his visits over the past weeks. What had started as book borrowing had evolved into something more: shared coffee, conversation about everything and nothing, comfortable silences that said more than words. A tremendous crash shook the building. Through the window, Abigail saw a massive tree branch had fallen across the street, blocking the way entirely, if Luke had been trying to reach them. "I need to check," she said, already reaching for her coat. "Absolutely not, Mrs." Chen blocked her path. "You don't go out in this. No one does." Another crash, closer this time. The wind shrieked through the gaps in the walls, and somewhere, glass shattered. "The storm's getting worse," one of the other women whispered. "What if the roof doesn't hold?" As if in answer, a section of shingles tore free with a sound like ripping fabric. Snow and wind invaded through the gap, sending papers flying and extinguishing 2 lamps. "Upstairs, everyone, Mrs." Chen ordered. "Bring blankets, food. We shelter in the small room, strongest walls." They gathered what they could and huddled together in the cramped storage room, listening to the storm tear at their building like a wild animal. Abigail clutched the Wordsworth volume she'd been planning to return it today, to exchange it for something new. Such a simple plan, now made impossible by nature's fury. Hours passed. The temperature dropped until their breath clouded the air. They shared what warmth they had. But it wasn't enough. If the storm didn't break soon, a pounding at the door cut through the wind's howling. Not random debris, purposeful, rhythmic, human. "Don't open it," someone whispered. "Could be anyone, could be trouble." But Abigail was already moving, something in her chest recognizing that particular rhythm. She yanked open the door to find Luke, covered in ice and snow, a rope tied around his waist leading back into the white darkness. "Thank God," he breathed. Then louder, "Everyone all right? Your roof's gone on the north side." "We know. Come in. You're frozen." "No time. This storm's going to level half the town before it's done. I've got the barn secured. It'll hold. Who's coming?" "Mrs." Chen made the decision quickly. "Everyone, girls, get your warmest clothes. Leave everything else." They formed a human chain. Luke's roped their lifeline through the blinding snow. Abigail found herself directly behind him, one hand gripping the rope, the other clutching his coat. The wind tried to tear them apart, to send them tumbling into the white void. But Luke moved steady as a mountain, breaking the path for those who followed. The journey felt endless. Snow stung exposed skin like needles. Twice, Someone stumbled and nearly took the whole line down, but they held because Luke held, and something about his solid presence made the impossible feel achievable. Finally, the barn loomed out of the darkness. Luke hauled the doors open, and they tumbled inside, gasping and shaking. He'd prepared hay bales stacked for windbreaks, his small stove already burning, blankets and supplies arranged with military precision. "Knew this was coming," he said simply, helping Mrs. Chen to a seat near the stove. "Been moving supplies here all week, just in case." While the others settled in, Abigail helped Luke secure the doors. The barn shook with each gust, but held firm, built with the same careful craftsmanship he brought to everything. "Your shoulder," she noticed. "You're favoring it again. Had to break through some fallen timber to get to you. It's fine." "It's not fine." She guided him to sit on a hay bale, then found the medical supplies he'd thoughtfully included. "Let me see." He submitted to her ministrations without protest, perhaps too exhausted to maintain his usual walls. His shirt was torn where he'd forced through debris, the shoulder beneath bruised and swollen. "You could have been killed," she said softly, cleaning a gash with gentle hands. "Coming out in this storm." "Couldn't leave you there. That building wasn't going to last the night." "But how did you even know?" "I know." His eyes met hers. "I always know where you are. Can't seem to help it." The words hung between them, raw and honest in a way he'd never been before. Around them, the other women were settling in for the night, creating small spaces of privacy with blankets and hay bales. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside felt suddenly impossibly warm. "Luke, don't," he caught her hand. "Don't say anything gentle right now. I might break if you do." So she didn't. Instead, she finished tending his shoulder in silence, then sat beside him on the hay bale, close enough that their shoulders touched. They stayed that way as the storm raged. Two people who had learned that sometimes words were unnecessary. "We're waiting out the storm," Abigail said finally, echoing words from weeks ago that felt like a lifetime. "Yeah," Luke replied, and his voice carried the same weight it had that first night, the same unspoken truth. Around midnight, the wind began to ease. By dawn, it had reduced to occasional gusts. They emerged from the barn to a world transformed, buildings damaged or destroyed, trees down everywhere, but the sun breaking through clouds like a promise. The laundry was half collapsed, uninhabitable, but as the women surveyed the damage, Luke was already planning. "McCready's old place sat empty for 2 years, he told Mrs. Chen. "Bigger than your old building, better constructed. Owner lives back east. Might sell cheap just to be rid of it. I could make it livable, set up a proper laundry operation." "With what money, Mrs.?" Chen asked practically. "I've got savings and connections, people who owe me favors." He glanced at Abigail. "Town needs your business. We make them see that." The "we" warmed Abigail more than the morning sun. She stood in the snow-covered street, surrounded by destruction and possibility in equal measure, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. "It's a good plan," she said. "I know bookkeeping. Remember, I could help with the business side, make sure the numbers work." Luke's smile was small but real. "Thought you might say that." As the town began to dig out, to assess and rebuild, Abigail realized the storm had done more than destroy buildings. It had torn down walls, the ones around Luke's heart, the ones around her own carefully maintained independence. Standing there in the bright morning, possibility spreading before them like fresh snow, she thought that sometimes destruction was just another word for new beginnings. The week following the storm passed in a blur of hard work and unexpected moments. Luke had been true to his word within 2 days. He'd negotiated with McCready's Eastern lawyer by telegraph, securing the building for a price that made Mrs. Chen shake her head in amazement. The whole town seemed invested in getting the laundry operational again, perhaps realizing how much they'd taken the service for granted. Abigail spent her days alternating between physical labor clearing debris, cleaning the new space, and the familiar comfort of working with numbers. She'd set up a makeshift office in the corner of Luke's barn, spreading out papers and calculating costs, projecting income, planning for the future. It was there, late on a Thursday evening, that everything changed. She was deep in calculations when she heard Luke's footsteps on the barn floor. Without looking up, she said, "If we can maintain current customer levels and add the hotel contract, we'll be profitable within 2 months." "Good to know." His voice sounded strange, tighter than usual. She glanced up to find him standing uncertainly in the lamplight, his hat in his hands. Moses sat at his feet, tail wagging slowly as if sensing the tension in the air. "What's wrong? Did something happen with the building?" "No, nothing like that." He moved closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "Abigail, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She set down her pencil carefully. "All right." He took a breath, his knuckles white where he gripped his hat. "I'm not good at this. Catherine used to say I could build anything with my hands but couldn't build a proper sentence about feelings if my life depended on it." She wasn't wrong. Abigail's heart began to beat faster, but she kept her promise and stayed silent. "These past weeks, having you here, working together, it's been like watching spring come after a long winter. I'd forgotten what it felt like to look forward to tomorrow." He met her eyes then, and the vulnerability there took her breath away. "I know I'm not much, a freight hauler with calloused hands and too many books. I know you came here with bigger dreams than a frontier town could offer. But He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration.
Hell, I'm making a mess of this.
"Luke, let me finish, please." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Fletcher. Have been since that night you stood in the rain outside Whitmore's. Too proud to cry and too stubborn to quit. And if there's any chance at all that you might—" She stood so quickly the chair tipped backward. Before he could finish, before doubt could creep in or propriety could assert itself, she crossed the space between them. His hat fell to the floor as she reached up to frame his face with her hands. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes," his voice was hoarse. "But I haven't asked anything yet." "Then ask." His hands came up to cover hers, warm and solid and slightly trembling. "Abigail, would you let me court you properly? I mean, Sunday dinners and church socials and—" "Luke Hart," she interrupted gently. "We just survived a storm that nearly killed us both. We've worked side by side rebuilding a business. I've seen you at your best and your most exhausted. If you think we need church socials to know each other's hearts, then you haven't been paying attention." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying yes, to all of it, to whatever you're brave enough to ask." For a moment, he just stared at her, as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Then something shifted in his expression, wonder replacing uncertainty, hope overtaking fear. "Abigail," he whispered, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. The space between them disappeared. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering to the floor as he tilted her face up. She had a moment to think how right this felt, how inevitable, before his lips met hers. The kiss was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd witnessed at church weddings. This was Luke pouring 6 years of loneliness into a single moment, and her answering with months of pride and fear and stubborn independence melting away. His arms came around her, pulling her against him as if he could keep her safe from all the storms still to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, she realized she was crying. He wiped her tears with his thumbs, looking concerned. Was that too?" "No." She caught his hands, holding them against her face. "No, it's just I'd given up hoping for this, for someone who would see me as I am, not as they thought I should be." "I see you," he said quietly. "Have from the start. Brave and stubborn and too smart for your own good sometimes. beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with Sunday dresses. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I see you. Abigail. Question is whether you can see yourself staying here, making a life in a town that didn't exactly welcome you. She thought about her grand plans of ledgers and respectability, about the dreams that had brought her west. Then she thought about these past weeks, about honest work and unexpected friendships, about a man who'd walked through a killing storm to keep her safe. Home isn't about the place, she said finally. It's about the people who make you feel like you belong. And Luke, you make me feel like I belong. He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise more than passion. When Moses whined and pushed between them, apparently feeling left out, they broke apart laughing. I should go, Abigail said reluctantly. Before Mrs. Chen sends a search party. Tomorrow's Friday, Luke said, not releasing her hand. Would you have dinner with me here? I'm a fair cook when I put my mind to it. Are you asking me on a courtship dinner after kissing me senseless in your barn? He grinned, looking years younger. Seems I'm doing everything backward. Catherine always said He stopped, the grin fading. I'm sorry. I shouldn't. Don't apologize for remembering her. Abigail squeezed his hand. She was part of making you who you are. I'm not so small as to be jealous of a memory. How did I get so lucky? It wasn't luck. She retrieved his hat from the floor, dusting off the hay. It was a storm. 2 storms, actually, and a woman too stubborn to get back on the train. She handed him his hat, then stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. Tomorrow night, then I'll bring dessert. Bring yourself, that's all I need. As she walked back to town, the stars bright overhead and her lips still tingling from his kiss, Abigail marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. She'd left Missouri seeking a position, a respectable job in a respectable town. Instead, she'd found work that challenged her, friends who accepted her, and a man who saw her true worth. Behind her, she could hear Luke actually whistling as he closed up the barn. The sound followed her through the quiet streets, a melody of hope and new beginnings. Tomorrow there would be questions, plans to make, a future to build. But tonight, walking through a town that was slowly becoming home, Abigail Fletcher allowed herself to simply be happy. The storm had passed. What remained was the clear, bright possibility of love. Dawn came earlier than usual, or perhaps Abigail had simply been awake most of the night, replaying the kiss in her mind like a favorite song. She dressed with extra care, choosing her better work dress and pinning her hair more carefully than warranted for a day of cleaning and organizing. Someone looks happy this morning, Maylin observed over breakfast, like she swallowed sunshine. The other women giggled, and even Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. Mr. Hart was here very late last night, returning you from the barn office. We were working on the business plans, Abigail said, knowing the heat in her cheeks gave her away. Ah, yes, business. Mrs. Chen's tone was dry as dust. This is why you float instead of walk, why you smile at your porridge. Business. Abigail gave up pretending and let her happiness show. He's asked to court me. The table erupted in delighted chatter, questions flying in multiple languages. Only when Mrs. Chen raised her hand did quiet return. Luke Hart is a good man, she pronounced, steady, honest. He will be good to you. She paused, then added with the faintest smile. Also, he owns property. This is practical. Trust Mrs. Chen to find the business angle in romance. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of activity. The new laundry building was shaping up beautifully under Luke's supervision. He'd enlisted half the town to help, calling in favors and promises until the place hummed with purposeful work. Every time Abigail caught sight of him directing workers, hauling lumber, sketching improvements in the dirt with a stick, her heart did a little skip. But she noticed something else too, The way conversations died when she walked by, the speculative looks, the whispers that followed in her wake. Pay them no mind. May Lynn advised when Abigail mentioned it. Small towns, small minds, they have nothing better to do than gossip. Still, it stung when she overheard Mrs. Patterson at the general store. Seems mighty convenient, doesn't it? Girl arrives with nothing, and suddenly she's got her hooks in the most eligible bachelor in town, and him still mourning his poor Catherine. Abigail's hands clenched around her market basket, but she forced herself to continue shopping as if she'd heard nothing. Causing a scene would only fuel more gossip. The afternoon brought worse. She was returning from a delivery run when Josiah Whitmore himself stepped out of his store, blocking her path. "Miss Fletcher, a word, if you please." "Mr. Whitmore." She kept her tone neutral. "How may I help you?" He glanced around, then lowered his voice confidentially. "I feel it's my Christian duty to warn you. Luke Hart is not the man he appears to be." "Indeed. There are stories about what happened in Kansas, why he really left." Whitmore leaned closer, his breath sour with tobacco. His wife's death wasn't the simple fever everyone believes. There were questions, suspicions. "Mr. Whitmore," Abigail said clearly, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "I believe spreading unfounded gossip is also warned against in Christian teaching. Good day." She stepped around him, but his words followed her. Don't say you weren't warned when scandal comes calling. By the time she reached Luke's cabin that evening for their dinner, Abigail's stomach was in knots. She'd brought an apple pie as promised, but her appetite had fled somewhere between Mrs. Patterson's whispers and Whitmore's insinuations. Luke opened the door before she could knock, and his smile faltered immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. It's been a long day." He studied her face, then stepped aside to let her in. The cabin was transformed, the table set with a cloth she'd never seen before, wildflowers in a mason jar, the smell of roast beef and fresh bread filling the air. "You went to trouble," she said softly. "Wanted to do things right." He took the pie, his fingers brushing hers. "Abigail, talk to me. What happened?" She sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "The town is talking. About us, about you." Whitmore said. She stopped, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what he said." "It matters if it's upset you this much." Luke pulled out the other chair, sitting close enough to take her hands. "What did he say?" "Something about Kansas, about Catherine. He implied—" She met his eyes. "He said there were questions about her death." Luke's face went very still. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he did, his voice was carefully controlled. "I wondered when that would surface. Small towns have long memories and longer tongues." "Is there truth to it?" He released her hands and stood, moving to the window. "Catherine died of scarlet fever. That's the truth, but she was alone when it happened. I was 20 miles away, delivering furniture to a customer, trying to earn enough to buy medicine she needed." His hands gripped the windowsill. "By the time I got back, she was gone, had been for hours." "Luke." "Her father never forgave me. Said if I'd been there, if I'd gone for the doctor sooner, if I'd been a better husband who didn't leave his sick wife alone." His voice broke. "Maybe he was right. Maybe if I'd made different choices, she'd still be alive." Abigail rose and went to him, placing her hand on his back. "You can't know that. Scarlet fever took so many that year. Being there might not have changed anything. But I'll never know. Will I?" He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes made her heart ache. Her father made sure everyone heard his version. How I'd neglected her. How I'd chosen money over my wife's life. The rumors grew worse with each telling until half of Kansas believed I'd practically murdered her myself. "Is that why you left?" "Partly. Mostly I left because everywhere I looked, I saw her. Every piece of furniture I built reminded me of teaching her to sand wood smooth. Every sunset looked like the one on our wedding day. He cupped Abigail's face gently. I ran here thinking I could outrun the guilt. Took me 6 years to realize it followed because I carried it with me. And now, he traced her cheekbone with his thumb. Now I'm learning that maybe the point isn't to forget the past, but to make peace with it, to believe I deserve a future despite my failures.
You do,
Abigail said fiercely.
You're the best man I know, Luke Hart. I don't care what Whitmore says or what this town whispers. I know who you are.
Even knowing this, even knowing the talk will get worse before it gets better. Especially knowing this. She turned her face to kiss his palm. We both have pasts that others judge, but that's all they are, the past. What matters is now. What matters is us. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious and breakable. I don't deserve you. Good thing I'm not asking what you deserve. I'm choosing what I want. She pulled back to look at him. And I want you, Luke Hart, complications and all. He kissed her then. Different from last night's passion, this was gratitude and promise and a dozen emotions too deep for words. When they finally separated, both were trembling. The roast is probably burning, he said against her hair. Let it burn. He laughed, the sound rusty, but real. Practical Abigail Fletcher suggesting we waste good food. You must be more affected than I thought. They managed to save dinner. And the evening that followed was everything she'd hoped: comfortable conversation, shared laughter, Moses begging scraps with soulful eyes. But underneath ran a deeper current, an awareness that they'd crossed another bridge, revealed another truth. As Luke walked her home under a canopy of stars, Abigail thought about the nature of courage. It wasn't just facing storms or starting over in a hostile town. Sometimes courage was opening your scarred heart to another person, knowing they might break it all over again. Are you sure? Luke asked as they reached Mrs. Chen's gate. The talk won't stop. It might even get worse. I wouldn't blame you if... She silenced him with a kiss. Right there on the street where anyone could see. Let them talk. Let them whisper. She'd found something worth fighting for. I'm sure, she said when they parted. More sure than I've ever been about anything. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Abigail could hear the night sounds of Dry Willow, distant laughter from the saloon, a dog barking, the whistle of the late train. Tomorrow would bring more gossip, more challenges, more small-minded people with long memories. But it would also bring Luke, and that made everything else bearable. The new laundry opened on a crisp Monday morning, with half the town turning out to see what Luke Hart and the Chinese women had built from disaster. The ribbon cutting was a modest affair, Mrs. Chen wielded the scissors while Mayor Thompson made a brief speech about community resilience and the spirit of enterprise. Abigail stood to the side, ledger in hand, watching Luke work the crowd with quiet efficiency. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, wearing his Sunday shirt and freshly shaved, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Public attention had never sat easy with him. Fine work, Hart. Judge McKinnon boomed, clapping Luke on the back. Though I hear you had some interesting help with the financing. There it was, the subtle dig. The implication that something improper had occurred. Abigail had heard a dozen variations over the past week. How convenient that Luke had money to invest just when the pretty bookkeeper needed help. How fortunate that business arrangements had become personal so quickly. Miss Fletcher's financial planning made the investment sound. Luke replied evenly. Any businessman would be a fool not to recognize her skill with numbers. Indeed. The judge's smile didn't reach his eyes. Still, one must be careful about appearances. Wouldn't want people getting the wrong idea about business partnerships. Abigail stepped forward before Luke could respond. Judge McKinnon, how nice of you to come. Will Mrs. McKinnon be using our services? I noticed her tablecloths at the church supper last week. The wine stains must be terribly difficult to manage at home. The judge's face reddened. Everyone knew his wife's grape juice was stronger than she claimed.
That is, good day, Miss Fletcher.
He retreated, and Abigail felt Luke's hand brush hers briefly, a private thank you for the public rescue. The day progressed smoothly after that. Orders poured in. The new equipment worked beautifully, and by afternoon they were ahead of schedule. Abigail was updating the books when Mei Lin burst through the office door.
Miss Abigail, you need to come, now.
The urgency in her voice sent Abigail running. In the main washing room, she found Luke facing off with 3 men she didn't recognize, travel-stained and hard-faced. They looked like trouble riding into town. "Been a long time, Hart," the tallest one said. He had pale eyes and a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Heard you were doing well for yourself out here. New business, new woman, like Kansas never happened." "What do you want?" "Dobson." Luke's voice was deadly quiet. "What I've always wanted. Justice for my sister." Dobson's eyes found Abigail.
"This your new lady, pretty thing? Does she know what happened to the last one?"
"Your sister died of fever. I've told you that 100 times. You told a lot of things." Dobson moved closer, his companions flanking him. "Told us you loved her. Told us you'd take care of her. Then you left her to die alone while you chased money. Is there a problem here?" Sheriff Watson stood in the doorway, hand resting casually on his pistol. Behind him, half the town seemed to have gathered, drawn by the prospect of drama. "No problem, Sheriff," Dobson said, not taking his eyes off Luke. "Just catching up with my former brother-in-law. Wanted to meet his new woman. Make sure she knows what kind of man she's taken up with."
"Then you've said your piece. Time to move along."
Dobson smiled, cold and mean. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. Got business in town. Might stay a while. Lots to catch up on." He tipped his hat to Abigail. "Ma'am, you might want to ask your beau about the bruises on Catherine's arms, about why she was so scared those last months. Fever doesn't leave marks like that." Luke lunged forward, but Sheriff Watson caught him.
"Don't! That's what he wants!"
Dobson laughed as he sauntered out, his men following like wolves. The crowd dispersed slowly, whispers already flying. Abigail saw Whitmore in the doorway, looking satisfied as a cat with cream. "Everyone back to work. Mrs." Chen ordered sharply. "Show's over." But the damage was done. Abigail could see it in the worried glances, the hushed conversations. She followed Luke outside, finding him by the water pump, splashing his face as if he could wash away the encounter. "Luke?"
"Don't."
He gripped the pump handle hard enough to whiten his knuckles.
"Just don't."
"I'm not going anywhere." He turned then, water dripping from his face, eyes wild with old pain. "Didn't you hear him? He thinks I hurt her, thinks I—" He broke off, unable to say the words. "I heard a bitter man looking for someone to blame for his sister's death." She handed him her handkerchief. "I heard grief twisted into hate because that's easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen." The bruises were real. His voice was barely a whisper. "She bruised so easily near the end, just helping her stand, lifting her when she was too weak to walk. I tried to be gentle, but she was so fragile, and I was so scared of losing her that I held on too tight." Abigail's heart broke for the younger man he'd been, desperate to save someone who couldn't be saved. "That's not abuse, Luke. That's love. Try telling that to them, or to this town, now that Dobson's here to stir up every ugly rumor." He straightened, resolution hardening his features. "You should walk away, Abigail, before this gets worse, before my past ruins your future." "No." "Be sensible." "I am being sensible." She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm choosing to stand by the man who walked through a killing storm to save us, who rebuilt a business from nothing to help women he barely knew, who reads Shakespeare and treats his old dog with gentleness and kisses like he's pouring his whole soul into it. Abigail. I'm not Catherine. Luke. I'm not fragile or easily frightened. And I'm certainly not walking away because some bitter relatives want to rewrite history. She took his face in her hands. We've both been judged by people who don't know our whole truth. Don't let them win now. He covered her hands with his, and she felt him shaking. What if they're right? What if I could have saved her? What if the moon is made of cheese? What if pigs could fly? She stroked his cheekbones with her thumbs. What if you stop torturing yourself with questions that have no answers? For a long moment, they stood frozen in that tableau, two people holding on to each other while the world tried to tear them apart. Then Luke pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. Stay, he whispered. God help me, I know I should send you away, but stay. Always, she whispered back. They returned to find the laundry in uproar. 2 customers had canceled their accounts, citing concerns about the management. Mrs. Chen was furious, the other women nervous. Business that had seemed so promising this morning now felt fragile as soap bubbles. But Abigail Fletcher had not come this far to be defeated by gossip and ghosts. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work reassuring customers, adjusting schedules, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. Luke worked beside her, silent but steady, and gradually, the panic eased. By closing time, they'd recovered most of the canceled orders and gained 2 new ones from people who respected courage more than they feared scandal. It wasn't a victory, exactly, but it wasn't defeat either. As they locked up for the night, Luke caught Abigail's hand. Thank you, for today, for everything. We're partners, she said simply. In business and everything else, partners stand together. He kissed her there in the doorway, not caring who might see. Let Dobson scheme and Whitmore gossip and the whole town watch. They'd survived storms and scandal before. They'd survive this too. Because sometimes love wasn't about finding someone perfect. Sometimes it was about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours, whose scars matched your own, whose courage gave you strength to face whatever came next. The winter dark was falling, but inside the new laundry, the lamps burned bright. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, walking home together through streets that whispered with rumors, Abigail and Luke held tight to the only truth that mattered. They were no longer alone. A week had passed since Dobson's arrival, and the town felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. The weather seemed to mirror the tensioned dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the air heavy with the promise of another storm. Abigail stood in the library, helping Reverend Pike organize the new books that had arrived on yesterday's train. It was her day off from the laundry, and she'd volunteered to assist, partly for the distraction and partly because the Reverend had been one of the few people to treat her and Luke no differently after the rumors started. Storm coming, the Reverend observed, glancing out the window. Looks like it'll be a big one. Seems fitting. Abigail shelved another volume, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. Luke had gone to the freight office early that morning, and she hadn't seen him since. Miss Fletcher, the Reverend's voice was gentle. I've been meaning to speak with you about something. She tensed, expecting another warning about her association with Luke. Instead, he pulled out a letter. This came for me yesterday, from a Reverend Michaels in Kansas. He knew I'd been corresponding with Luke and thought I should know the truth about what happened there. Abigail's hand stilled on the books. And Catherine Hart was indeed very ill. Reverend Michaels visited her often in those final months. He writes that she spoke constantly of Luke's devotion, how he worked himself to exhaustion trying to pay for medicines and doctors. He folded the letter carefully. He also mentions that Thomas Dobson was furious when Catherine chose Luke over a wealthy rancher Dobson had picked for her. The man never forgave either of them. So this is about more than grief. It often is. The Reverend touched her shoulder kindly. I thought you should know. Truth has a way of surfacing, even in the darkest storms. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Abigail left the library. The streets were nearly empty, everyone sensing the approaching tempest. She hurried toward the laundry, needing to ensure everything was secure before Miss Fletcher. Dobson stepped out from between two buildings, his pale eyes glittering with malice. All alone. Where's your protector? I don't need a protector, Mr. Dobson. She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. If you'll excuse me. You know what he is, don't you, what he did? Dobson moved closer, whiskey thick on his breath. You're just like her. Catherine thought she was too good for the man I chose. Thought that carpenter could give her better. Look how that ended. Your sister chose love over money. I'm sorry that bothers you. His face twisted. Love, he killed her with his neglect, and now he's got you fooled too. The only fool I see is a man so consumed by hate he can't let his sister rest in peace. The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Pain exploded across her cheek as she stumbled backward. Don't you speak her name, Dobson snarled. You're nothing but a... He never finished. Luke appeared like an avenging angel, one fist connecting solidly with Dobson's jaw. The man went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. Touch her again, Luke said quietly, and I'll kill you. Dobson's two companions emerged from the shadows, hands moving toward their weapons, but Sheriff Watson and 3 deputies were already there, having followed Luke from the freight office. That's enough, the sheriff said firmly. Dobson, you just assaulted a woman in front of witnesses. You can cool off in my jail or get out of town. Your choice. Dobson spat blood, glaring at Luke. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Luke's voice was granite. You've blamed me for 6 years because that's easier than accepting you drove Catherine away with your controlling ways. But I'm done carrying your guilt along with my own. Get out of town. Thomas, don't come back. For a moment, violence hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Then Dobson's shoulders sagged. Without his rage to sustain him, he looked old, broken. She was all I had left, he whispered. She was all I had too, Luke replied. And for the first time, there was pity in his voice. But she's gone. Let her go. Thomas, let us all go. The sheriff and his men escorted Dobson and his companions away. The gathering crowd dispersed slowly, and Abigail found herself alone with Luke as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Your face, he said, touching her reddened cheek with infinite gentleness. I'm fine. She caught his hand. How did you know to come? May Lynn saw Dobson following you. She ran to the freight office. He pulled her into his arms as the rain began in earnest. I'm sorry. This is my fault. My past. Our past, she corrected. We're partners. Remember? Thunder crashed overhead, and suddenly the sky opened. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them instantly. But neither moved, standing there in the street as the storm washed over them like baptism. Looks like another storm, Abigail said, echoing words from what felt like a lifetime ago. Luke smiled, rain streaming down his face. Then let's wait it out, together. Together, she agreed, and stood on her toes to kiss him. They were still kissing when the sun broke through the clouds, painting rainbows across the wet streets. Someone started clapping misses. Chen, standing in the laundry doorway. Mei Lin joined her, then others, until half the town seemed to be applauding. About time, Murphy called from her coffee house. You two have been dancing around each other long enough. Even Whitmore, watching from his store, couldn't maintain his disapproving scowl, because there was something powerful about witnessing love that had weathered storms, faced down demons, and chosen hope over fear. Marry me, Luke said suddenly, loud enough for everyone to hear. I know it's too soon, and we should court properly, but I'm tired of wasting time. Marry me, Abigail Fletcher. She looked at this man who'd offered her shelter in a storm, who'd rebuilt a business to help strangers, who'd faced his past to protect their future. This man who read Shakespeare and treated old dogs gently and kissed like tomorrow might never come. Yes, she said simply,
Yes to all of it. Yes to you.
The crowd erupted in cheers as Luke spun her around, both of them laughing and crying and thoroughly soaked. The storm was passing, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling with possibility. Later, as they sat in Murphy's coffee house wrapped in borrowed blankets while the town celebrated around them, Abigail marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She'd stepped off a train with nothing but stubborn pride and a worn satchel. She'd found work that challenged her, friends who supported her, and love that transformed her. No regrets, Luke asked quietly, his arm around her shoulders. She thought about ledgers and respectability, about dreams of a different life in a different place. Then she looked at this man who'd taught her that sometimes the best things came from the worst storms. No regrets, she said, and meant it. Only gratitude. Outside, Dry Willow went about its business people shopping, working, living their lives in this small frontier town that had become home. The laundry would open again tomorrow, bringing its own challenges and rewards. There would be other storms, other tests. But tonight, surrounded by friends and wrapped in the warmth of new love, Abigail Fletcher knew she was exactly where she belonged. Not because it was where she'd planned to be, but because it was where she'd chosen to stay. And sometimes, the best love stories were the ones you never saw coming, the ones that arrived like storms and left you forever changed, forever grateful for the shelter you found along the way. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what you thought about Abigail and Luke's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press that hype button to help more people discover this tale of love, storms, and second chances in the American frontier.